Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Lollipop and this is the Freego F1 Pro. This is the most powerful and most expensive e-bike that the company Freego makes. So I'm very grateful that they were able to send me one for a review video on my channel. So thank you, Freego. And on that note, if you guys do want to check out Freego after watching this review video, you can click my special link in the description below to get $50 off a brand new Freego model. All you have to do is click that link, and then when you are checking out, just use the discount code Lollipop to get $50 off a brand new bike. So some of the highlights of the F1 Pro are, for one, definitely the looks and the styling. You can see it's going for more of a retro motorcycle or moped style of look, especially with this large circular headlight up front right here. This beefy dual crown suspension fork, which is just crazy looking. This long padded seat area as well. And just overall, the entire look of the frame just kind of looks like that. It is also the fastest and most powerful e-bike I've ever tested on my channel. I've gotten this one to go almost 30 miles per hour in my test rides, and you'll see that later on in the video when I actually get on the bike and start riding it. And on top of that, it's a full suspension bike with a rear shock here for added comfort, and that crazy downhill style suspension fork I already mentioned, so it just looks super cool. So in this video, I'll go over all the specs on this bike. I'll talk about what I like, what I don't like. I'll show you the assembly process, and I'll give it a nice test ride at the end of the video to give you my overall thoughts and review on this bike and let you know if it's worth the money. So as with all of these electric bikes, there is some assembly required after it shows up to your house. So I'll show some time-lapse footage I took of me assembling it. And unfortunately, due to the frame design, this bike does not have a good spot to really clamp the bike stand onto. You can see me try several times and fail here, so it was a bit more difficult to assemble this bike, I'd say, but I did have to actually even flip it over at one point just to adjust some parts like the brake and the drivetrain, and I had to put it on a stool as well to access some other areas like the front brakes, so I had some awkward angles here to work with, but hey, that's the sacrifice you make for style. Overall though, the assembly process wasn't terrible. However, my bike did come with a very bent front brake rotor that was rubbing an extreme amount on the brake pads, so I ultimately had to remove that completely and try to flatten it out a bit on the table, which I did, as you can see here. And it's still not perfect, but it is definitely better. Alright, enough of that. Now let's move on to the specs, starting with the price. So this bike retails for $2,300 US, which is a good amount of money, but I've seen it on sale for about $1,900 or even $1,700, so that's a better deal for sure. And for that amount of money, let's see what you get. Okay, so we got to talk about the look of this frame first. So this bike is designed to fit riders who are 5'3" tall to 6'4", so a pretty wide range, which is nice to see. And partly why that's possible is because of the design of this frame. So you can see right here that there's no seat post on this bike in a seat. It just has this long seat pad area, and you can sit basically anywhere along that, which is nice. And I find this to be actually pretty comfortable. It takes some breaking in to get used to it, but I do prefer it over a normal seat on a bike. And talking about the seating position, this bike also has these very high handlebars here, so you have a very upright seating position that is good on your back, so that's a plus for sure. One thing I will note, however, though, for shorter riders, it might be a little bit more difficult to get on top of this bike. I'm around 5'8" in height, and you can see it comes up to basically my hip here with the seat, so you kind of have to like throw your leg over it to get on it, but besides that, it's pretty good. This bike also has some cool frame details like these Freego logos cut out on the sides of the metal right here, as well as this attached waterproof case in the front, which I really like here. You can see you can actually store a lot of things in here, so it's pretty useful. You can unzip it and it has a bunch of space inside here, and it's bolted onto the frame. And it also has a kickstand on this side to prop up the bike. I do personally think that this bike looks pretty nice. It does look a little short lengthwise, which makes it look a little funky, but besides that, I think it looks pretty cool. However, one downside to this frame is that it is made out of steel, which is unfortunate because that makes the bike heavier, and it also makes it more susceptible to rusting if it does get damaged and you leave it out in the rain or something like that. But just be careful with it and you should be fine. Alright, but now let's go over the battery and motor. So Freego has a few different models, but this is their highest end bike. So it has their most powerful 1400 peak watt motor, which is located in the back wheel right here. So this big hub motor right there. And this is paired to a 48 volt 22.5 amp hour battery located in the center of the bike right there, as you've seen before. Now for context, most of the electric bikes around this price range have around 1,000 peak watts, so this one should feel much more powerful. However, I've not really noticed a big difference in acceleration or power compared to other e-bikes I've tested. So I'm not really sure what's going on there, but it still feels powerful enough, so I'm not really complaining about it. Now to engage this motor, we have a throttle on the right side of the handlebar here, and that works great, but you also have 5 pedal assist modes, so you can pedal to engage the motor at varying power levels. The pedal assist modes are good for cruising and saving battery life, but due to the gearing on this bike, they're not as effective as the throttle. You kind of find yourself running your legs in place a lot, but I prefer using the throttle anyway, so it's not a big deal to me. Now on the topic of speed, let me show you just how fast this bike can go. Okay, so here we are on a very flat and smooth and straight road. There are a few cars driving past, so I'm sorry about that, but I measured the incline and it was basically 0 degrees for the most part. It does go up a little bit later on, but I am just going to kick up the pedal assist to level 5 so we get the maximum power output. All right, let me yank on the throttle. All right, we're already at 20 miles an hour. Gonna go on the pedal assist as well. Try to max this out. 27, 28, 29, woo, 30 right there, 31, holy crap, gotta be careful, watch what's in front of me here, 32, 33, come on, 34, let's go, 34, woo. Turns out that was actually a bit of a downhill slope. So that's why I'm going to call it around 30 miles per hour. It goes 30 on a flat road. Downhill was going about 34 right there, and it could go even faster than that. So that is awesome. This bike also has a claimed range of 30 to 50 miles on a single charge, which is a bit less than other e-bikes I've reviewed. However, it's still pretty good for daily riding and anything like that. And for charging the battery, you can plug the charger into this port on the side, or you can remove the battery entirely using the included key and charge it separately. This battery also has a USB port on the side so you can charge your devices, which is a cool feature. But now let's move on to the display screen. This one is really simple and intuitive to use, just a basic LCD screen that you turn on by first turning on the battery right here, and then you can go back and hold the power button on the screen. And here you can see your battery life, your current speed, some other information right here like your trip info, and some other stuff that might be useful to you. And then you can also see which pedal assist mode you are in right here, and you can just increase that right there to go all the way up to 5 or go back down to 0. And then from here you can also turn on the front and rear lights by holding this plus button right here, and then you can see that logo pop up on the screen. And you can see we have a pretty bright front light for seeing at night, and a nice red taillight that is fairly bright as well, so I have no complaints here. Now for the component specs, we do have front and rear suspension on this bike, both of which are nothing too high-end. They're off-brand products. The front fork actually doesn't even have a brand on it, but it does have some pretty wide stanchions, so it's not just a flimsy fork or something like that. It does actually provide some comfort while riding, and the look of it is just so cool. I really like that, and I think people buying this model will appreciate that dual crown look as well. However, the downside of having this fork is that your turning radius is limited. At a certain point when you're turning, the fork does actually hit the frame, and you can't turn any more than that. So that is something to consider. It hasn't caused me any issues yet, besides when I'm like walking the bike around and want to make a sharp turn, but it's not the end of the world for sure. For the rear, we have an HLT 100 shock. And this one is a coil spring, so it's not adjustable. It does provide some damping, but honestly, it is pretty stiff as it is rated for 1,000 pounds. Not sure about the longevity of this shock, and honestly, I looked it up and it cost around 30 bucks or less, so it's definitely pretty cheap there. It adds a cooler look to this bike, which I think is the main point to it in this case. So that being said, I would definitely not take this bike on any mountain bike trails or anything like that. The suspension can handle rough roads and light trails for sure, but not much more than that if you do want to still be comfortable. The next components we have are the wheels. So first off, you can see that we have these full coverage fenders on this bike to protect against rain, mud, and rocks hitting the bike and you while you're riding, so that's great. And we have these smaller 20-inch diameter wheels on this one, so you can easily tell that these are CST branded BFT tires, and these are actually 4 inches wide, which is well into the fat tire category, and they do have some good traction on them for riding on dirt and light trails if you do decide to go in those areas. And for the brakes, this bike does come with hydraulic disc brakes, which is good to see since they provide a good amount of stopping power. The brake rotors themselves are only 160 millimeters wide in the front and rear, So nothing great there, but they get the job done, and I haven't had any issues with braking on this bike. The only unfortunate thing is that the rear brake isn't set up properly. Since you can see here, I need to pull the brake lever all the way to the grip in order to get the brake to engage, and that likely means that there is too much air in the hydraulic line and it needs to be bled. Luckily, the front brake is fine and the rear isn't too bad. And the final component we'll talk about here is the drivetrain. So first off, for the shifter, it's just a generic Shimano shifter, nothing special there. But back down here, this is basically the same as any other drivetrain you get on a fat tire electric bike at this price point. It has a very large front crankset up here to maintain speed, and a smaller freewheel in the back right here, so nothing very special. Now typically these bikes come with something like a Shimano Altus rear derailleur, and those work good enough, but this bike comes stock with this lower end, older style of Shimano tourney derailleur. And I gotta be honest, this is a very low quality part. It doesn't shift well, it bends easily. But on the bright side, derailleurs are fairly inexpensive for lower end drivetrains, so you could swap that out. And honestly, I mainly use the throttle anyways, so I don't really notice the lower quality drivetrain as much on e-bikes, unless of course your battery dies. But now let's take this bike out on a good test ride so I can give you my final thoughts and review. Alright, so for this test ride, I'm gonna start off on the road where this bike kind of shines. I'll take it on some hills and stuff so you guys can see that, and then I'll hit some light trails at the end. So like I mentioned, riding position is great. I feel very comfortable and upright. The grips are a little hard, but I'm wearing gloves, so I barely notice that. It doesn't really feel like an issue. The only downside to having something like this seat pad is that it's kind of a fixed width. You can't really make it wider if you have a larger bottom or something like that, so that could be uncomfortable for some riders. In terms of pedal assist levels, I feel like they're totally fine. Pedal assist 1 is kind of topping out around 12-13 miles an hour. Pedal assist 2 kicks it up to around like 15-16. So they have good like incremental levels, I say. Not really noticing, you know, the full suspension aspect of this bike on the road, because the suspension's like barely getting engaged on the road. But I mean, you can see like whew, whew, I can bounce this thing around for sure. And like I mentioned, the gearing on the drivetrain isn't the best. I pretty much have to stay in the hardest gear, gear 7 here, to really feel like I'm pedaling at all. Any other gear and it's like I'm just like moving my legs a lot. Bike's going about 20 miles per hour on assist level 3. All right, now this is definitely a hill. We're on pedal assist level 2 right now. I mean, it's picking up the hill just fine. This motor is a little loud. I'm noticing more and more. Yeah, it's slowing down a bit. I'm gonna go on this bike path actually. Let's go on these rocks. Woo. Yeah, it's definitely straining a bit more than I would expect. Let's do full pedal assist 5 here. Is that 10 miles an hour, 15? A little underpowered. I would expect it to be a little faster than that, considering what they claim the motor and battery size to be. But it's not bad, it still makes it up the hill fine. Let's see how fast this thing goes downhill actually. 33 miles an hour. Oh god, 35. Oh. This feels crazy. I will mention that I'm wearing a helmet and some good protection on me as well. Yeah, this bike feels perfect for my height for sure. My knees aren't really hitting anything on the bike. I feel like I have a good amount of space. On a bit of a light trail here going downhill, just to check it out and see how it does if you ever have like a gravel path in your way. And so far this is pretty comfortable. I like this. Ooh, big hawk right there. Yeah, the full suspension, I'm not noticing the rear shock too much here. Like I can see it from where I am positioned, and it's not really moving up and down, but this also isn't too bumpy. Let me take it off-road a little bit and see if I can get it to... Yeah, I mean, it feels very stable, and this is more of a walking path anyway. It's not really designed for bikers. But man, I mean, these wide tires can handle this for sure. Take it off here, jump off the side. Woo! Okay, that was kind of cool. It handled that mini drop there pretty well. I'm actually liking this bike a good amount. Or maybe I'll start with one of these mini ones first right here. Let's start with that. All right, starting with the mini drop. Okay, yep, it's fine right there. Okay, for this. Oh. Yeah, no, the upright seating position on this bike isn't great for going downhill. That was a little sketchy. Felt like I could go over the bars pretty easily, so not really recommended for that kind of stuff, but you know, it's not really that kind of bike. It's more of like the motorcycle style. I'm not trying to hit big jumps or anything on this one. Let's kind of hop this curb. Woo! Oh yeah, that was stable. That was planted right there. Yeah, you could do some good stuff on this bike. It feels like it could handle a good amount. It's just not anything like too crazy on the mountain bike style of things. But yeah, I'd say this bike is great on the road. It's comfortable, smooth, and stable. Up hills is kind of where it's having the most issues. I think it could be more powerful going uphill. But on some light trails, this thing is pretty awesome. It handles it well. It's very stable. It can take some jumps and some drops for sure. And it's not really like shaking around or anything. It feels planted, partly because it weighs about 80 pounds. I mean, it is that steel frame like I mentioned. Okay, so is this bike worth your money? If you do get it for $1,700 or even $1,900, there are a good amount of e-bikes that provide similar power to this one. However, I do think this one is a great deal. It has a great battery and motor combination that rivals its competitors well, but it goes even faster than the other ones I've tested. On top of that, it has the cool factor in styling, including that front suspension fork and the rear shock right there. Now, once again, these suspension components are definitely not for mountain biking, but having this platform with the front and rear shock allows you to kind of upgrade these parts in the future if you do want to do that. So you could throw a higher quality rear shock on there and then actually have it be more capable to go on actual trails. Overall, I'd say get this bike if you do want a bike that's pretty much just as powerful as the competition, but you really like that moped style look of this frame and the option of having that front and rear suspension on there as well. However, you just have to be mindful that it is not designed for hardcore off-road riding, and there are certain components on here that will have to be upgraded in the future if you do want it to last a long time. Besides that, guys, thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate each and every single one of you. I hope all of you have a great morning today, and remember to keep biking.